we're going to begin with our first talk. Welcome, Gullermina. Gullermina Natera. She's Director of Epidemiological and Psychosocial Research at the National Institute of Psychiatry Ramón de la Fuente Muñiz in Mexico. Member of the National System of Researchers, that's very important here in Mexico, level 3, that's the highest. She has a master in psychology and educational sciences, is doctoral candidate in anthropology. Natera's areas of interest are mental health, addictions, family and partner violence in rural, indigenous, and urban contexts. She has published more than 200 articles and 3 international books. Thank you very much.
Okay, I am very grateful with Albert for this invitation to participate in this selected group, especially because several of you have a great deal of experience working with emotions and affects. I hope I will be able to contribute something to the discussion, and I am sure I will learn a lot. I apologize. Okay. I apologize because English isn't my strong point. So I hope we'll be able to understand each other. ¿Se oye bien así? I divide the talk in 3 sections. The first, addiction is a brain disease. For this part of the conferences, I am followed to Nora Volkov, that is one of the main researchers in this topic, and also she is a director of NIDA, National Institute of Drug Abuse. And the second part will be emotions from another perspective, and finally a case study, crack addiction. Okay. First, as always said, talking about emotions is more complex than it seems. And it is because emotions are feelings, states, and classic psychological emotive responses that are interpreted based on the history of the organism and the context. Motivation is a persistent state that leads to organized activity. Both are intervening variables and intimately related and have neural representation in the brain. Okay. A definition of emotion is a psychic and physical reaction such as anger or fear, subjectively experienced as a strong feeling and physiological involving change that prepare the body for immediate vigorous action. Drugs and emotion. Why do people take drugs? To feel good. Most abused drugs produce intense feelings of pleasure. To feel better. Some people who suffer from social anxiety, stress-related disorders, and depression began abusing drugs in an attempt to lessen feelings of distress. To do better, some people feel pressure to chemical enhance or improve their cognitive or athletic performance. Curiosity, because others are doing it. Dysphoria, due to the withdrawal of drug. Science has demonstrated that addiction is a disease of the brain. Yes, it is, but not only. Despite the advances, the concept of substance abuse as a brain disease continues to be questioned, maybe because the impulsive and compulsive behaviors that are characteristic of addiction have not been clearly tied to neurobiology. However, let's try to explain the link between addiction and brain function and to extend the understanding of addiction as a brain disease. Perhaps for some of you, these are very common concepts, and perhaps you know better than me. Addiction reduces the ability to feel pleasure and the motivation to pursue everyday activities. Moreover, the increasing strength of conditioned response and stress reactivity, social environments, developmental stage, and genetics are intimately linked to an influence, vulnerability, and recovery. Now let's explain a little bit about the stage of addiction. According to the scheme, addiction is divided into 3 recurring stages. Binge intoxication, the second is withdrawal and negative affect, and third, preoccupation, anticipation, or craving. Binge and intoxication, all known addictive drugs activate reward regions in the brain by causing intense increase in the release of dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter present in regions of the brain that regulate movement, emotion, motivation, and feelings of pleasure. At the receptor level, these increases produce a reward signal that triggers associative learning or conditioning. This conditioned response becomes deeply ingrained and can trigger strong cravings for a drug long after use has stopped. Second stage, withdrawal and negative affect. An important result of the conditioning physiological process involved in drug addiction is that helpful rewards lose their former motivational power. In a person with addiction, the reward and motivational systems become reoriented through conditioning to focus on the more potent release of dopamine produced by the drug. As a result, persons with addiction no longer experience the same degree of euphoria from a drug as they did when they first started using it. Also, persons with addiction often become less motivated by everyday stimuli that they had previously found to be motivated and rewarding. This name is dysphoria. The person with addiction transitions from taking drugs simply to feel pleasure or to get high to taking them to obtain transient relief from dysphoria. Persons with addiction frequently cannot understand why they continue to take the drug when it no longer seems pleasurable. The third stage is preoccupation and anticipation. The changes that occur in the reward and emotional circuits of the brain are accompanied by change in the function of the prefrontal cortical regions, which are involved in executive process, among which are the capacities for self-regulation, decision-making, flexibility in the selection and initiation of action, attribution of silence, and the monitoring of error. Those altered signaling in prefrontal regulatory circuits paired with change in the circuit involved in rewards and emotional response create an ambivalence that is crucial to both the gradual development of compulsive behavior in the addicted disease states and the associated inability to voluntarily reduce drug-taking behavior. Or this complicated scheme that is more clear for many persons here, and is a very good scheme to learn or to learn about the addiction. Biological and social factors involved in addiction. It is important to say that only a minority of people who use drugs ultimately become addicted. For example, in Mexico, 6.2% of the population aged 12 to 65, 4.9 million people, has alcohol dependence. 0.7% use any drugs. 550 million, 550 thousand people, while 8.9%, 7.1 million, are daily tobacco users. According to a report presented to the CICAD in 2003, the total cost of the drug problems in the country was 618 million pesos, 0.1% of gross domestic product. According to another study by 2009, the cost had increased to 62.3 billion pesos, equivalent to 0.52% in the gross domestic product. Many genetic, environmental, and social factors contribute to the determination of a person's unique susceptibility to using drugs initially, sustained drug use, and undergoing the progressive change in the brain that characterize the addiction. Stress has long been known to increase vulnerability to addiction. The term stress refers to process involving perception, appraisal, and response to harmful, threatening, or challenging event or stimuli. Stress experiences can be emotionally, physiologically challenging, and activate stress responses and adaptive process to regain homeostasis. The most important of this scheme is the vulnerability factors, adverse events, trauma, chronic stress, negative emotionally, poor executive function, trait impulsivity, genetic and family factors, and the response is the stress, the challenge, the behavior and the emotional control decrease, the impulsivity increase, and the decision-making decrease. This is the maladaptive behaviors. Also, in these maladaptive behaviors, we can see the craving increase, distress increase, and drug use, abuse increase. Okay, in the middle, the specific synaptic change in these pathways provide the basis for the mechanisms by which stress and individual and genetic factors in column A interact to increase risk of maladaptive behaviors represented in column C. Then stress experience in the presence of these vulnerability factors result in maladaptive stress and self-control response that increase addiction risk. This is I would like to show the results of one research doing in my institute by Corina Benyet. The table shows the influence of the principal adversity in young people for different patterns of consumption. And the more adversity, the more likely they are to using drugs. Okay, perhaps you can see criminal background, parents, and witness of family violence it has a high influence to opportunity of alcohol use, also to alcohol consumption among those with opportunity, and alcohol use independence among consumers. Witness of family is another effect, very important in this to consume alcohol, sexual abuse, and other losses. For drugs, we have a similar, but not equal. The most influence are parents' problem use, parent criminal background, witness of family violence, physical abuse, negligence, and death parents. These effects influence different manner in these different form of consumption. But this is the studies in Mexico. I think that is one of the main study that related with these influences of the adversities related with use or abuse or dependence in drugs and alcohol. Following, neuroscience research supports the brain disease model of addiction and others. New opportunities for the prevention and treatment of substance addictions because it improves our understanding of the fundamental biological process involved in voluntary behavior control. It challenged established values about self-determination and personal responsibility that frame drug use as a voluntary hedonistic act. According to this view, addiction results from the repetition of voluntary behaviors. How can it be the result of a disease process? Also, this concept of addiction appears to some to excuse personal irresponsibility and criminal acts instead of punishing harmful and often illegal behaviors. However, advances in neurobiology have begun to clarify the mechanisms underlying the profound disruption in decision-making, ability, and emotional balance displayed by persons with drug addiction. The concept of addiction as a brain disease has been more disconcerting implications for public attitudes and policy towards the addicted. Implications of the brain disease model of addiction for prevention and treatment. I can say that a more comprehensive understanding of the brain disease model of addiction may help to moderate some of the moral judgment attached to addictive behaviors and foster for scientific and public health-oriented approach to prevention and treatment. Nora Volkov is a very, she said that I read, okay? Neurobiological research shows that addiction is a disease that emerges gradually and it has its onset predominantly during a particular risk period, adolescence. Adolescence is also a period of enhanced neuroplasticity during which the underdeveloped neural networks necessary for adult-level judgment, the prefrontal cortical regions, cannot yet properly regulate emotion. Okay, the images of the brain development in healthy children and teens age 15, 20 is very, very, very interesting how it's changing. Is it to see the table? Yes. Or we change. Children and adolescents with evidence of structural or functional change in frontal cortical regions or with trait of novelty seeking or impulsivity are at greater risk for substance use disorders. The knowledge that prefrontal and other cortical networks that are so critical for judgment and self-regulation don't fully mature until people reach 21 to 25 years of age has helped to develop public health policies. For example, the adolescent brain is much less able to cognitively modulate strong desires and emotions. This observation is particularly relevant to the establishment of 20 years of age as the legal drinking age in the United States, by which time the brain networks that underlie the capacity for self-regulation are more fully formed. In Mexico, for example, to public policy We are trying to increase the age of adulthood to 21 in order to delay the onset of use. I suppose that will be very difficult because the policy is very difficult, but we are trying to do when we talk about the public policy with the deputies and in the cameras. Okay. This is. Scientific research has helped to develop effective prevention and treatment approach. There are 3 types of prevention programs. Universal programs address risk and protective factor common to all age groups in a given setting such as school or community. Selective programs target groups who have factors that put them at increased risk of drug use. Indicated programs are designed for youth or general people who have already begun using drugs, so people who get drug or who get or who have an addiction. Also important are early screening intervention and provision of social opportunities. But when the prevention has failed, there is a need for treatment. And the treatment, medical treatment restores brain circuitry and leads to improvement in behavior. Medication can assist in preventing relapse. Behavioral interventions to help restore balance in brain circuitry. Strategies to mitigate a person's stress, reactivity, and negative emotional states. Strategies to improve executive function and self-regulation. A strategy to avoid drug association environmental cues, says Volkov. But I said, and what about the family? We are talking at the end of the conference about the family, because the family is a subject olvidado. How do you olvidado? Forgotten. The family is forgotten, and I think the family is very important in this context, the drug addiction. Okay, it's brief effect of cocaine abuse of dopamine D2 receptors. And this is relevant because researchers are trying to evaluate interventions that may increase D2 dopamine receptors and have found that it is beneficial to promote social support systems. A study in addicted patients, very preliminary but very interesting, has shown that the physical activity, in other words, exercise, causes an increase in D2 dopamine receptors in the stratum. Why do some people become addicted to drugs while others do not? In summary, what varies is how adverse their emotional and social situation is. But someone growing up in an environment where there are not behavioral alternatives, where parents are not there, where a person has a job that provides no personal reward, or involves a high stress level, where very few behaviors are pleasurable or reinforcing, the individual will be a greater risk socially. Summary related with this first part of the the addiction like disease of the brain, we can say, in addition, impaired signaling of dopamine and glutamate in the prefrontal regions of the brain weakness, the ability to resist strong urges or to follow through on decisions to stop taking the drugs. Important to become better educated about the genetic, age-related, environmental susceptibilities to addiction as they relate to structural and functional change in the brain. If early voluntary drug use goes undetected and unchecked, the resulting change in the brain can ultimately erode a person's ability to control the impulse to take addictive drugs. Emotions from another perspective. We have explained the emotions from perspective of brain mechanism and neurotransmitter, but not all is dopamine. Feelings are the antecedents of perceptions, and meaning provides a link between consciousness of the world. Say Merleau-Ponty. They are the path of awareness and knowledge, lending meaning to a person's sensations. Feeling and emotions are not absolute states. As Albert Hansberg would say, they are not a single class. Le Breton says they are substances that can be transposed from one individual and one group to another. They are not or not only physiological or psychological process whose secret the body is supposed to hold. They are relations involving social objects. They are forms of belonging to a social community, a means of being recognized and being able to communicate against the background of a similar experience. They also involve sentiment, experience, behavior, cognitions, and conceptualizations. Between the human society and another, men affectively experience depend of their existence through different cultural repertoires, which are sometimes similar but not identical. Affective culture provides schemes of experience and action, on which the individual bases his behavior according to his personal history, style, and, above all, his assessment of the situation. Feelings is style emotion in time. Emotion is the resonance of a real or imaginary past, present, or future event in the individual's relationship with the world. Paul Fraser says that an emotion emerges when the demands of the situation are disproportionate to the subject's possibility. In other words, when there is a mismatch between his perceptual and cognitive expectation and his repertoire of responses. For a feeling or an emotion to be experienced and expressed by an individual, it must belong to the cultural repertoire of his group in one way or another. Feelings are born in a specific individual, a social situation, and a particular relationship to an event. They are modified according to the public and differ in their intensity and even their expressions. For example, we are aware that a drug user will express feeling differently towards his parents, children, or wife than he will to the interviewer after a period of reflection. For example, I feel sad because I lost my children because of my addiction. I lost my wife because of my addiction. I now realize that my wife and my children are what I value most. The actor plays with the expression of his affective states. The emotion emerges before they are fully expressed and leads to frustration. I will talk about feelings, motivation, and behaviors based on analysis of Victor Turner's social drama. This is a proposal to understand the process of the addiction, since the anthropology point of view. As I mentioned earlier, since drug abuse is an eminently social problem, users' behavior should be analyzed through social theories to understand at least one of its parts, including perceptions, emotions, and feelings. Victor Turner's theory, through the analysis of social drama in the form of a social metaphor, is a way of understanding conflicts within the community. They are the results of tension in the social system, producing a gap that develops until it reaches a crisis. During this phase, the conflict expands and may continue as social imbalance or provide an opportunity to begin the process of repair, which is how drug use and emotions are experienced. Turner noted that in liminality, the transitional state between two phases individuals were betwixt and between. They did not belong to the society that they were previously and part of, and they were not yet to recuperated into that society. Liminality is a limbo, an ambiguous period characterized by humility, seclusion, test, sexual ambiguity. The theory of social drama attempts to follow the regular, orderly sequences of behavior and comprise 4 phases of public action. Let's explain Turner's scheme with a case. These are testimonials of crack users between 21 and 45 years, analyzed based on the 4 phases Victor Turner study, theoretical of social drama. This study was done in the National Institute of Psychiatry, and we worked with 150 persons who consumed crack in different periods. Since 5 years to 10 years consumption. The first phase for Turner is the breach. The breach emerges when somebody breaks the common norm that regulates the relationship between parties. People that are initiated in the use of crack no longer fulfill these responsibilities, leave work or school, spend time on the street, face economic problems, argue with family, and experience rejection, anger, and family concern. The emotions that they express principally were pleasure, feelings of well-being, freedom. I feel good, and so far I feel good smoking is not alter me. I feel the sensation and relax. It is a pleasure of a momentary pleasure that escapes from your hands. I have done it honestly for hedonism. It is like the pleasure itself to add the hours. The second is the crisis. It widens and extends the gap between parties. Consumption intensified. Getting crack in the daily goal, they engage in risky behavior, stealing, exchanging sex for crack, disappointing the family, leave their children, neglecting their personal image, their health is severely impaired. Emotions, principal emotions are fear, guilty, remorse, rage or anger, loneliness, sadness, depression. It gives many moments of pleasure and also very nasty depression. You do it because you have an empty space to feel, but at the end you feel guilty. I started losing dignity and respect. I lived afraid of the policy, the next informal treatment center following AA steps, family. The desire for crack motivated me to do things, to do sometimes don't want to do. Then I consume crack and I feel guilty. In the depression, I have thoughts that the things that I have caused or have lost. Redressive action. Use mechanisms of resolution like seeking treatment, bowing, seek religious support, exercise, move to another site, decide treatment or others decide. Emotions, loneliness, sadness, hotness, feeling support, reflection. My father takes me to the next because he wants to me be well. I went to AA to avoid my mother suffering. Poor mom. She said she was very worried because of me. I hate my family. They brought me to the annex where I was mistreated and then relapsed. In the annex, you should apologize for what you have done. I got pregnant, and for my baby, I stopped using for 9 months and during breastfeeding. When I reacted, I said to myself, what happened to you, girl? What are you doing? There are also something called world right, and I stopped using crack. Reintegration. In reintegration, we interviewed consumers that in this moment were in abstinence. The abstinence was since for 1 year to 7 years. The reintegration involved conflict resolution, reflection about consumption, became treatment, desire to improve personal image, sense of responsibility with family, children, work, search for other satisfaction. The emotions are joy, happiness, hope, feeling good about themselves. I stopped using drugs. I learned to make craft, worked and supported my family. My wife was reconciled with me. I recovered my children. I felt much better. AA works. You just have to want to change. But many of them, however, people relapse and return to the circle. One of the explanations that they did is because the family don't receive like they was waiting. During the process, nobody thought the family to deal with the drug user's emotions. The family itself cannot handle their emotions because the past events. Emotion as argumentation, manipulation, justification, or experience. Nobody pay attention to the family. Lastly, the users are governed by feelings and emotions. They are not merely subjective state, they are bursts or interpretation and meanings dependent on social and cultural considerations. In the testimonials in these actors, we see how the lives of these users are governed by feelings and emotions. One can see how, as Nussbaum, Martha would say, the cognitive activity transformed into judgment, evaluations, or thoughts is required to produce their emotions. To quote Rodriguez, they are not merely subjective states. They are the bearers of interpretations and meaning dependent of social and cultural considerations that define the moments and circumstances that must be experienced. We see that if no one deals with emotion, particularly user's family, at the time of social reintegration, users experience another break, crack, or relapse. While it is true that in these cases, the expression of emotion can be seen as a process of argumentation by the user so that others understand him and reintegrate him into the community and forgive him so that he can forgive himself. It is impossible to deny the, the deep involvement of his speech in the expression of his emotions, even if we suspect that his speech has an unfair or manipulative aim, justification for suffering another relapse. This is the result of his experience and of his reality at the time. Meanwhile, since no one has thought the relatives to cope with drug users' new emotions, the link is broken again. Therein lies the treatment power emotion in rehabilitation. The experience of emotion dramatically stimulates social contact and social communication, either positively or negatively. Thank you very much. course, not all the persons who take drugs or alcohol are alcoholics or drug addicts. This is the brain. The, the conference was for the person who has an addiction. They are at the end of the process, and explain a little the progress, because of course many people that we know take drugs and take alcohol and don't happen nothing. They have an experience and a personal experience, mental experience, and perhaps it's very important for the person, and not necessarily they need to they will be addicted because there are another many others um, um, situations that avoid that this man or girl arrive to addiction. For example, they have a personality, una structura de personality better. If they have a better, they have not the solution by the drug addiction. They have the solution in the work, and they can have can drink or have drugs. This is I think that around the drugs are a lot of mystery and a lot of prejudice. And we are agree that one cigar of marijuana is not no hace un verano. Un consumo no hace un verano, ¿no? And it's very important to say that we need to talk about the general consumption, and we accept the general consumption, but our work is to prevent to arrive to another stage. We try to avoid, and many adolescents, perhaps friends of yourself drink or have drugs in the adolescence, and they stop because they don't want to. They don't view. They don't view in the drugs the solution to her lives, to their lives. But in another cases, we are doing this kind of explanations. We belong allow we allow to make some programs to prevention in children and adolescents. If they want to take drugs, they need to do what happened and take the decision. If your answer is a very sociological question, and it's very interesting, and I think that we need to study more about this population, because we are always studying the population in high risk. ¿Qué otra pregunta? Okay. If I understood, okay, I prefer to translate. Please. Predisposición genética. I think that that is both are possible. I think. I think that exists in genetic some disposition, but if you never have have drugs or alcohol, you never despertar, trigger the consumption. But the other is you have genetic if you drink and consume drink and drug. Perhaps the most important is how the environment influence to the genetic. Okay, I think that both could be possible, but I'm very sure. My opinion is that both are. And the other question is. Que si la enfermedad está ahí radicando. I think that is not genetic. I think that the social environment is more important to high risk in the consumption. It's my opinion. I think the ambience. Also, I think the ambience is more determinant for me. And I also think, for example, when the mother drink and she's a consumer of a drug abuse and estoy pensando en inglés y en español. And there are some research about the transmission of possibilities, the addiction when in the parto, ¿cómo se llama? El nacimiento, in the birth, when the mother and or the father are addicted to one substance, perhaps the heredability to the children, perhaps. And this is more this person are more risk to get drugs in the adult life. But the question is the most important question. I think that is the question that we have not solution. But or no really, or no very consistent solution. But I think finally, I think the ambience is the more determinant to get addicted. And the genetic influence, if they have not the genetic predisposition, I think that the ambience influence, they don't just develop the addiction.
Thank you very much. It's related to the last question, because if you say that the environment plays a role in I would have thought the percentage a lot.
Because this data coming from encuestas, surveys, from national surveys, and they include 12 to 65 years old, and this survey does not include jails, people who don't live in a house, in home. And this is, if we compare the data, for example, Mexico and United States, that the methodology of survey is very similar. Perhaps United States has more addicts than the survey says, of course. And in Mexico also, for example, we have not the children on the street, and we have not the people who has not a house in Mexico, or they are homeless or something like that. So we have the survey. The most important data for the survey is to know how is growing, how is increasing the consumption. And we saw, you have reason, we saw that the consumption is increasing day in years old low. But the surveys say more than about that, the development of the problem than the another data. Yes.
It's just a comment. And with the addictions, which are very complex issues, as you can see, it's very important to emphasize that there are stages. I mean, first you have to take the first time the drug. This is just experimentation. Okay. Further, you can go to use, you can go there to abuse, and you can get addiction. This is a long period, and it depends on many things: genetic things, environmental, social, educational. I mean, it's quite complex because for each person it can last different. I mean, you can see teenagers which, from the first time to the addiction, it's very a short period. But the interesting thing with the idea of Gullermina of addiction as a brain disease is that we have learned a lot. As an example, with nicotine. With nicotine, we know that nicotine goes to some receptors in some area. It increases dopamine, and the brain has very, very high levels of dopamine. You can compare it with diabetes. I mean, if your body has very, very high levels of glucose, you would be in trouble. Our brain is in trouble with dopamine, and it's the same with all the drugs. Very, very high levels of dopamine. It has to change the brain. And the receptors, as an example, in nicotine, there is a very high increase of receptors. I mean, you can now prove from the clinical and experimental point of view that drugs or substances can change the structure and the function of brain. That's why we know this is a brain disease, because there are changes you can see. You can see and you can prove. And this is very important, not only to understand but also for treatment. If you think this as a disease, you can use this knowledge for treatment. As an example, why to use cognitive therapy? Because you have to teach addicts to use cognitive processes, as an example, problem solution and emotional control. This is very important. You can teach them so the prefrontal cortex can go to the area of pleasure, and you can control pressure. This is what we usually do. If you like to eat, you cannot eat the whole time. You can control eating. If you like sex, you cannot all the time. I mean, you have to control, okay? You learn how to do it. And this is the same what we do with addicts. And this knowledge is very important because now we are doing treatments using these ideas, and they are very useful because now we understand we can teach addicts to control emotions, problems, stress, and other issues. And it's quite interesting to see the changes. And also, we have to think about addiction as a brain disease when we talk about relapse. This is very important. When you are addicted, all those changes stay there. I mean, the brain is made for memory, no? So you keep information, and the information is there. If an addict becomes try the drug. I have patients, smokers, who have stopped, I don't know, 15 years ago, and suddenly they begin smoking, and the process is quite different. I mean, it's not experimentation, use, abuse. No, they can finish 40 cigarettes the same day they began to try cigarette again. So you see, brain is quite interesting, and you have to think in brain and brain disease to understand addictions, treatment, relapse, and all those things. So it's quite interesting. Of course, you have to you find social, educational, genetic. As an example, pregnant women who smoke, the babies have a predisposition to because they change. And as Dr. Natera mentioned, of course, the younger the brain, the more sensitive, I don't know how to say, but to drugs. And there are many studies on babies, on adolescents whose mothers smoked or took drugs, and of course they have a predisposition to use the drugs. So it's quite interesting.
My question is if it is necessarily the case that when someone has continuous consumption of drugs, they will become an addict and therefore reduce functionality or have the breach that you were talking about. And then a question that is very related to answering that is, and we were talking, what is the criteria to distinguish when addiction becomes a disease? But not only from the point of view, from a neurological point of view, also from an emotional point of view or a social point of view. Because I think what you were saying, it's basically that the levels of dopamine are abnormal. But what is it about this abnormality that allows us to say that addiction is a disease? From a point of but not only from the brain, from a neurological, from emotional and a social point of view. But if you're functional in your normal life, as like we were saying, like she was saying before, there are plenty of adolescents who take drugs continuously. So, what's the line that distinguishes healthy or functional drug use? Right, but for example.
So I'm not sure if this is a question, it's more like a comment. And I'm guessing it's probably going to be a subversive comment. So the thing is that I was thinking about the debate that started here. and I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know much about these things. I'm probably wrong, maybe. But I'm thinking that the main issue here, the thing that makes us call it a disease, it's probably that it doesn't make us function as society wants us to function. And that is why caffeine is not often seen as an important drug. So you get changes in your brain from caffeine, and people can get withdrawal and things like that. But, I mean, you can go to work, so it's not a disease, or at least it's not a disease for most people. And then with things like cocaine or, harder drugs, things that maybe you can, like Anna said, maybe you can go to work, maybe you can have like a normal life, maybe you're like right at the line, and then you can get withdrawal, but you can still function, you're in between. The thing is that it's very easy to stop doing what you're supposed to do, and I think that's what makes us call it a disease. So we can get changes from all different kinds of things, like caffeine, but then caffeine makes you work better, so it's not that bad. So you can reply, it's not really a question, but it's more my opinion, a popular opinion.
These discussions between lawyers, theologians, and doctors about the nature of an entity has a long tradition. Hysteria, for example, is it demonic possession? Should we put them in jail, or should we try to cure them? I think that you have to take a view of several points of view. As a long-time collaborator of Dr. Nora Volkov, I would like to put a word for the medical model, its explanatory power, and the fact that it can aggregate and it is continually growing. The brain images that Gullermina brought to us today are growing very, very fast. There is a project called Enigma, which is studying 50,000 persons with brain characteristics and genomic characteristics at the same time. The theological model of the addictions, it's a sin, has been tried, didn't work. The criminal lawyer's model, not working. The social problem is growing. So let's try another model. Let's try the medical model. And the information is coming in. There are little rats that become alcoholic, and they have found dozens of genetic changes that predispose them to like more alcohol than other persons. There is clearly a genetic link between the dopamine hypothesis and genetics. Many of the genes that have to do with dopamine production, with the reception of dopamine, with the cycling of dopamine within the nervous system have been identified. There is another gene, monoamino oxidase, that also has to do with dopamine. So the story is growing. So that would be. Now, as a long-term collaborator of Dr. Natera, I would like to say that it is not enough, as she put in one of the slides. You need two extra things. You need the psychological thing. You need this idea of mental states and what are the feelings we're talking about. Because feelings is not just feeling good or feeling bad. Feelings and emotions have an extraordinary range of subtleties. And especially with the drugs that naturally grow in Mexico, like mescaline and psilocybin, you can get a lot of feelings related perhaps to the sacred or to the erotic, etc. So just as with a photon, you need to take a double view because it is both a particle and a wave, which is counterintuitive, but that's a fact. Here you need a triple view. You need all these biological things to consider. You need the psychological states and the philosophical elucidation that goes with the use of language and all these things, this idea of Wittgenstein that philosophy is a faith. is a fight against the bewitchment of intelligence by language, which I think is a very pertinent idea in the field of addictions. And you also, of course, need the social, because the degree of where does something become a disease, where does my glucose intolerance become a diabetes, is also determined by social and especially by economic factors. So I think that it's important to try to keep those three spheres in mind.
Hey, thank you for that. I was wondering whether there's some hope, so to speak, from the brain point of view, meaning I get that it changes when the subject is using or abusing drugs. But if he stops or she stops for a long time, is there some neuroplasticity maybe or something that can recover the brain? Because otherwise it also seems, as you said before, that all the weight is put on the social conditions. And so the family will be just like, okay, I know you can't do better because your brain is not working anymore. So, and it's just like, is there something happening when you stop for a long time that can recover the brain as well?
You ask me if the brain recovery? Yes, the brain recovery. This is the good news. This is the good news, no? That cocaine. Yes, yes, if you have treatment. Would you like to explain?
Use a special substance that goes to the receptor. That is the beauty of positron emission tomography, that you can label any organic molecule and see how it's behaving. You can see that there are a lot of receptors because the radioactivity is catch up by the receptors in a normal person. You have 4 cuts of the same person going from here down. Then, if you take a cocaine abuser who has been withdrawn from cocaine provokes a secretion of dopamine, you see that as a reaction to the excessive dopamine heaven that the person lived for a few minutes, you have to pay the price that in a month you have no more desire. Because dopamine, from another point of view, you're talking about desire, you're talking about things you want, you're talking about love, etc. And then 4 months, as you see, there is a little increase in the dopamine receptors compared to 1 month. So yes, all this plasticity that we are talking about happens, but it takes a long time.
Not feel them. I mean, there's the word is anhedonia. I mean, you feel nothing, and this is why. So 4 months of hell and more, because there are some other images which show that 8 months after, and you still don't have the same number of D2 receptors. So this is this period, it's very hard for addicts because probably you have to be careful because they want to suicide, because they feel very bad. You have to be very careful. Maybe you have to take medications, of course, because they need help. Because you see, the brain is not working as it used to be, and of course there's a recovery, but the recovery is not on the next day. It takes time. With enzymes, with monoamine oxidase, of course there's a recovery, but the interesting thing is that there's memory. I mean, the pathways which are linked to drugs, they stay in the brain. So when you take again the drug, something happens, and you can again remember all the pleasure and all the things you used to link with the consumption, and this is why it's very now the new paradigm of addiction is that you cannot completely I don't know how to say heal. You cannot completely heal an addict brain. I mean, you have the condition to be healed is not to take the drug again. So this is very, very, very interesting because what we have to do, as Dr. Natera mentioned, is to stop people to become addicted. Because once you have an addicted brain, the healing is quite complex.
They feel bad. They feel bad. Yes, but sometimes they decide to follow until the death have the drug or the alcohol. It's a decision, it's a free decision, and but if they want because they have another support, they can ask. But in Mexico, the problem is that we have very few treatment for all the population that they need treatment. Okay, this is another problem. This is another problem.